All right. Hey, Susan, how are you? Welcome to This is 50 Freedom Through Passions.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I agree. I agree. I can't wait to get into your story because on our pre-call, it was so much fun. And yeah, you're an amazing woman. You're in your 80s. You've written a book. You've run a business for 20, 30 years with your husband. You have a very good story to tell and a good one to share that I think a lot of people are going to find some inspiration on. Before we get started, I want to just ask you four quick rapid fire questions. So first of all, tell us the best part of your entrepreneurial journey.
I think the best part was that it really helped me find myself. I had been in business with my husband for about 25 years. And although it was really fun and I loved working together, and I think it really made the marriage so strong. But on the other hand, it wasn't really me. Writing this book, which is entrepreneurship of a different kind, it really helped me identify as a writer, even though when I was in business with my husband, I did a lot of writing. We were in the film business and I wrote the films, but I just thought of myself as a businesswoman, not a writer. So being an entrepreneur yet again in the writing business really helped me identify with who I do at this point. People say to me, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm a writer," and I say it with pride. So it's done a
Oh,
lot.
yeah, no, that's amazing. And, I think even in our pre-call, you talked a little bit about, it took you a long time to even say that I'm a
Yes.
writer.
Yes.
So,
In fact,
yeah.
I'll tell you when I started to say it. The book was published in 2022, and I've just recently started my second book. And it's on the second book that now I say I'm a writer. The first one I thought, well, it was good luck. Everybody can write one book. But now that I've started the second book, I can see how much I've learned, how far I've come. It's going much faster, I mean, et cetera. So, but it took me, I'm 81. So it took me 80 and a half years to say that. I guess I'm a late bloomer. I don't know.
Okay, I love it. Okay, so all right, so if I mean obviously this podcast is meant more for women in midlife who are considering entrepreneurship. Sometimes they're a little bit stuck, they're fearful. What advice would you have for women in midlife who are sort of a little bit hesitant, but kind of want to step into the entrepreneurship world, whether it's writing a book, starting a business?
I think I'd say a couple of things. Number one, I was terrified too. I mean, if you're terrified, if you're one of those, and I hope you are, I think it's very a worthwhile fear in the sense that, first of all, it is scary. It takes money, it takes energy, and it takes guts. And second of all, because you're scared, it will help you do some deeper thinking. And at least for me, it forced me to kind of analyze what way I wanted to go. When I was in business with Fred, I had just finished applying for my teaching credential. I had just finished my student teaching, and I never taught. I just went into business with him. So I didn't have much time to be afraid or for self examination. But when I wrote the book, I did because I started it, and I know it took about 10 years to write. So I probably started it when I was whatever, 60, 70. And I sort of thought to myself, what am I doing? And it really forced me to examine, is this what I want to do? I'm in the last third of my life. Is this how I want to spend it? So I would say that if it takes guts, and be aware of that, it takes fear. Don't feel guilty about being frightened. Use it to motivate you. And it's what can I say? It's a very intense experience, but I did enjoy it very much, and I've loved writing the books. And the book business is also entrepreneurship. I was thinking about the question a little earlier. And you have to market the book, and that's not my favorite part because now I can say I'm a writer. But if you want to sell it, you have to market it. The book is just the product, and it takes
Absolutely.
marketing stuff. So I think that answers you.
Absolutely. And that's super interesting you're saying that because the first thing I say when people join my coaching program, where I help them come up with an idea and then get to their first client, is okay, you have now officially become an online marketer. So just get to know that because yeah, you have to sell your stuff. And so that's really interesting that you're saying that.
Right.
So okay, so it took you 79, well, I guess so early 70s is kind of when you started the book. So it took you that long to, get a book in you. So what inspired you to write it?
Well, I had actually, now that I think back, because it took me a while to write, I think I started in my 60s, and I had retired from my husband, our business. And I was going to do lunch, and I was going to learn to play golf, and I was going to do all of those things, which lasted literally about 3 seconds. I got so bored. And I was driving my family crazy. And my kids said to me, Mom, if you don't go do something, we may have to kill you. And they said that independently of each other. So I thought, I better get my act together because I was bored. I was going nuts. And so I went back to school and decided I was going to like get a PhD in something. I didn't know what, but I thought maybe English, maybe psych, sociology. Anyway, so I went to UCLA, and of course, all those classes were filled. So I ended up in anthropology. And for the anthropology, one of my courses, I was doing a project on women who had hysterectomies. And they had all agreed to the surgery, even though it was something they weren't even sure they needed it, yet they agreed to this irrevocable surgery. And then, so it made me wonder because so many of them said, well, I agreed to this, but I didn't think I needed it. So I wondered, how as women do we make medical decisions? I had had a similar experience many years back, and where I agreed to some surgery that I didn't think I needed. Thank God it wasn't a hysterectomy coming because it didn't matter and I was fine. But nevertheless, as women, what do we think? Why do we do this to ourselves? Why don't we research? Why don't we get second opinions? So that was really the impetus for the book. And from there, it just kind of took off, and I interviewed a bunch of
Yeah.
women. So it is.
Okay. Okay, so it was a sort of a kick in the pants from your kids and your family. Mom, you're going to drive us crazy. You
Yeah,
decided, okay, well, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to university. Like what? University in your I guess mid 60s,
right.
and then and then this sort of getting down on this path, and then the opportunity to write the book. Amazing. Okay, and so because of that and doing all of that in later in life, what how really has your entrepreneurial journey later in life especially impacted your overall well-being?
Hugely. Number one, as I said, and the most important part is now I identify as a writer. But on top of that, my husband passed away about 3 years ago, and I needed a project. I needed something to do, something to help me deal with the grief. And both books really helped me. The second book has helped me because I love to do research and I get into it and I forget how troubled I am. And book number one has helped me because in marketing, I do a lot of podcasts and I really like the interaction with people. It takes my mind off myself, etc. So they both have been hugely helpful.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, Susan, let's get into the interview. This is 50 Freedom Through Passions. You and were connected through, I guess, a marketing agency reaching out to me asking if I'd interview. I took one read through your profile and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna interview this woman. In full transparency, I could not get my hands on the book fast enough to read the whole thing, although I have got a really in-depth view of it. I was again reading it last night. The book is called Sidelined. First things first, Susan, give us a little bit of background, who you are, where you're currently living. Tell us a little bit about your previous 25 years with your husband working together, and then a little bit about the book in terms of the value proposition of the book.
Well, let's see. I was in business, as I said, with Fred for 25 years. We made training films for businesses. We did films like on customer service skills, telephone skills, that kind of thing. And as I said, I wrote the book. And then, as I said, I retired, went to school. Now I live north of San Francisco in the wine country, which is lovely. We moved up here about 10 years ago to be with our grandchildren. Both my kids were up here, and I'm originally from Los Angeles, and we were driving up to Petaluma, which is where I'm located. It's about a 6 hour drive, and we were coming up every 2 weeks or so. In fact, the kids' nursery school teacher thought I lived up here because I was at their school so often. So I thought, well, maybe she's telling me something. So Fred and I moved on up, and here we've been here, as I said, for 10 years, maybe even 12. I have to think about that. But the wine country is a lovely place to be. And frankly, I forgot the rest of your question.
Just a little bit of your history, like just just some background. I mean, that was perfect. So in our pre-call, you talked a lot about sort of this decision to go back to university after you had retired. You retired in your sort of mid 50s. You mentioned earlier that you thought you were going to luncheon, you thought you might learn how to golf, and that didn't last for very
It did.
long. So what motivated you, other than you talk a little bit earlier about how your kids really sort of said, mom, you got to do it, but what was going through your head? You're now retired, you've been an entrepreneur, you've been kind of leading, you've kept busy that way, you've being an entrepreneur, you have to be pretty self-motivated. I can't see people who have been entrepreneurs and then all of a sudden they retire and they do nothing. And I think that's where you caught
Yeah.
yourself a little
Well,
bit.
and
And so,
I think what really motivated me, honestly, was I was, besides the fact that my kids, the family dynamic was rapidly changing. I had to go do something. But I think what really motivated me was that I was bored. And I thought, I can't do this for the next, I mean, humor aside, I can't do this for the next 30 years or whatever I've got left. I'm going to go nuts. Plus, I was stagnating. And one of the things I really realized, and I think I said even this when we talked earlier, but when I was working, if I'd wake up in the morning and I didn't feel good, well, I had to go to work. So, you just put on your big girl pants and off to work you go. And then by the time I got home, I was fine. I mean, I don't know, I just forgot about it. But when I was retired for that week or whatever it was, I'd wake up with whatever. And by the time, the afternoon passed, I was sure I was dying. I mean, there's nobody to focus on but yourself. And so I was very competent at thinking about nothing but me. I mean, the narcissism in that was just incredible. So that was a real motivation. The one thing I don't want to do ever, even whether I'm 80, 90, or 22, I don't want to stagnate. And that was a really uncomfortable feeling. So then when I did go to school, I'm sorry, you were going to say something. I saw you start.
no, I was just going to say, like, and I mean, you say a little bit of that in your book where you thought, well, oh my God, the days are going to get really freaking long if I don't do
Right.
something. And that really resonated with me because I mean, I see certain people and, people around me that I'm very close with who are older and retired. And, the I can see the loneliness, the depression
Yeah.
possibly setting in. And just like, yeah, I can hardly wait to like, what's going to happen today? And yeah, that was super insightful.
Well, I think that one of the things that you need to think about for everybody that's getting older is you need to prepare for it. And you have to find something that's satisfying to you. And for me personally, sitting around, and I'm an avid reader, but just reading all day or watching television, it's not meaningful. It's interesting, it's entertaining,
Hmm.
but it's not meaningful. And I think that's an important distinction. And when I went back to UCLA, the professors, everybody was really nice to me. Well, first of all, I was their age, for one thing, or a lot of them. So, they took care of me.
You were probably
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I mean,
you were probably refreshing actually. It was probably like, oh my God, somebody who's actually going to come and who's going to actually be interested
right,
in
I know.
taking this
And
course from end to end.
somebody who wants to be here. No, it's true. Absolutely true.
Yeah.
And so I learned, but you asked about one of the other things that motivated me to write the book and sort of figure something out to do was that I learned so much in the anthropology. I'd never taken anthro as a kid. I was an English major. And I learned so much I took a lot of medical anthropology, and I learned so much about women and doctors and the gender bias that really permeates the medical industry. And it is an industry. And I thought, this is information that women need to know. And I didn't know it. And I read a lot of medical journals. I've always been interested. I mean, in my next life, I might be a doctor. I've just always been into it. And I didn't know some of this. I mean, I didn't know that women are misdiagnosed more than men are. And I didn't know that women wait longer to have a heart attack treated than a man does, even though they have the same symptoms. I mean, I didn't know stuff like that. It had never happened to me only because I'd never really been ill. But I was lucky I'd never been ill. I think that being female is it can be really risky for your health. And I did not know that. So that was what really inspired me to write the book.
Exactly. And one thing you do say in the book is like how we as women don't really have these conversations with other women, and we barely have the conversation with our doctor.
Right.
And I totally agree with that. I mean, even when I turned 50, I had like every single menopausal
Yes.
symptom
Right.
possible, all in like with the first 6 months. And I thought to myself, how the hell do I not know
Right.
this, you know?
Right.
And so then you start asking your friends and like, oh yeah, da, da. Like, why were we not talking about this? Why didn't you talk to me that you were going
Right.
through these
It's
struggles?
true.
And so that's something that I think you got super curious in when you were interviewing, you started this project with your school. Before we go down that path, though, I want to just ask you a quick question, or I just want to ask you, like, okay, so you're now retired for about a week. You realize golfing and lunching, it's probably not going to be it. I'm living with a narcissist myself, kind of thing.
Exactly.
And so you have the courage to go back to school. Like, did you not have like that? What are people going to think? Oh my God, like I'm too old. How am I possibly going to keep up with the pace of going back to school like that? Like, were there
Oh, I
not
had
any sort
all
of
of
like, what were
those.
there had to,
Every one of them that you said. First of all, I was so anxious on the first exam that I actually tripped up the steps, not down, but up. Fell right on my butt. I mean, it was pure anxiety. Who falls up the steps? I never heard of such a thing. So, yes, I had all of those. I wasn't worried about keeping up particularly. I only took two classes a semester because I'd already graduated and
okay.
I had thought about the PhD. And in terms of thinking that I would be too old, which did occur to me, obviously, because what do they take 7 years to get? But I thought, so in 7 years, I'm going to be 68. I'm going to be 68 anyway. I might as well be 68 with a PhD. I mean, that felt really good. So
Yeah.
that sort of took care of that thought. But the only thing I felt was a little lonely on campus because, they were all kids. And I mean, not that you can't have intergenerational friendships, but the difference between 60 and 20 is fairly substantial. Um, and so, I mean,
Right.
I met a couple of kids that I really, really enjoyed. I have to say that. But basically, it was lonely. But on the other hand, it was so interesting to me and I felt so good about myself. I was finally getting up in the morning. I had a place to go. I had homework to do, which at time, my friends would be out lunching and golfing or whatever they were doing, and I'm home studying. And I thought, what's wrong with this picture? But by the same token,
Hmm.
I felt very satisfied doing it. So it took away the narcissism. It really did when I realized how difficult it is for women who are sick to really get effective care and that keeps the
Yeah.
motivation going.
And I love when you were saying that, you were getting up every day, you were going to school, you were doing, you felt sort of purposeful again. And I think though, even though that people are retired and they do enjoy the golfing and they do enjoy the lunching, eventually I think that sense of purpose or the lack of purpose, if they're not
Right,
volunteering or giving
right.
back, giving their skills and talents back to the world, I think we'll always have that aha moment where, okay, great, I've got this, I finally got this life, but yet I just don't feel like I have any purpose. Okay, so you're in university, a tiny bit lonely because there's a huge age gap
Yeah,
differential, but hey, you're upskilling still, you're learning, you're feeling
right.
you're feeling great about yourself, your mindset's in check. And so you start down this path of um, interviewing some women about their hysterectomies, their unnecessary surgeries. And then the conversation just gets broader and
Right.
broader, but it's still around women's health. Tell us a little bit more. What did you uncover during those interviews?
Oh, so much. First of all, I interviewed about 50 or 60 women. And the first thing I learned, and if there's anybody out there that's a writer and wants to interview people, it's so much better to interview people you don't know, because even UCLA, and that's obviously a reputable institution, they were amazed at the intimacy of the information I got. Because we were talking about a hysterectomy, so a lot of the women told me about their sex lives, sexual preferences, all that kind of thing. In fact, one of the women said to me, "Well, I'll never see you again, so it's okay if I tell you." And she was right. I mean, we had a lovely conversation and I haven't seen her since. But you can't do that if it's somebody you know. So that's the first thing I learned just as an interviewing technique. But I learned how many women don't talk about their illness, how many women feel ashamed and feel guilty when they're ill because they can't be as strong and take care of their families as well as they want to, have been in the past, and feel that they're expected to. So I learned about the guilt and the shame. I learned about their hesitation to get a second opinion. I learned about misdiagnoses. Oh, I learned so much. I really did. Which is why I wrote the book, because I think in many ways, while gender bias certainly permeates the medical community, I also think that sometimes some women, in some ways, do themselves a disservice by some of the decisions we make, such as not getting a second opinion or feeling guilty.
Hmm.
And the main thing,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go on.
No, and I want to drill down on feeling guilty. Like, why do we feel guilty? And when we talked earlier, I was like, I don't know, do I feel guilty if I got sick? And then I thought, you know what? There's probably, when you go through each one of the sections of your book, you're really not talking so much about the medical aspects, but you're talking about the mindset
Right,
of these women
right.
and what, right? And then the impacts on your health. And then I kind of had a little aha, and I'm like, these are almost the same types of mindsets that you could apply to anything we do as
Mhm.
women. We put people, we put, we use our money towards our kids and other people first.
Right.
Like, it's really interesting. And that's what I liked about the book, is that it, it's a medical resource, I would
Yes,
say,
it is.
right? But
I
it's
agree.
not, yeah, but you're not a doctor. But what you are is you're surfacing these weird things that we get in our brain, and we do these really crazy things, and we stop ourselves from doing things that are right for us and good for us, because why? I don't get it. So, like, why am I feeling
Well, I
guilty because I got sick?
just to sort of piggyback on what you said, one of the things that's different about this book, because you're absolutely right, I'm interested in behavior. I can't tell you how to
Yeah,
cure your diabetes or how to live with diabetes. I mean, or
exactly.
whatever it is. That's not this book. This book is about what we do as women, the decisions we make, why we make them, and how they help us and how they don't help us. And for example, I
Yeah,
don't feel ashamed or guilty when I get sick. I get pissed. I get so angry. But I was amazed at the amount of women that really did feel guilty. And to answer your question of why, I mean, that's a big question. That would take, 12 interviews. But I think that honestly, we're cultured. We're, what's the word I would, culturally expected to take care of other people. I mean, that's why the airline says, put your own mask on before you do your kids. We're caretakers. Women globally, all over the world, do 80% of the caretaking. I mean, that's a lot. We work, we have our professional jobs and our domestic jobs. We run the house. I mean, my husband was a wonderful cook and a very bright man, and he really did so much to help in the house, but he could not open the refrigerator and make a shopping list. He could not figure out what we needed. So I would, wherever I was in the middle of whatever, I'd have to go down and make the shopping list. I mean, it was like he had an IQ of 12, it was ridiculous. And I think that that's so true. And it's just so automatic. I would trot down the stairs, make the shopping list, and say thank you for going
yeah,
to the store, whatever. But I think that it's just a
yeah,
cultural expectation because there's really no logic behind it whatsoever. Um, and I think that that's a big why. And it just seems to be, it transcends cultures. It really does. It's all over.
absolutely. So, okay, so one of the common themes that resonated. At this point, you really, when you're interviewing these 50 women, you're not really clear if there's a book. When was it that you had this aha that, holy cow, I think I've got a book here? Because I think what people think is, if I'm going to write a book, I need to know the table of contents before I get started writing.
Oh, that's such a
And
good
yours,
Oh, that's just such a good point,
yeah,
and I was one of those. I started out actually, and I didn't even remember this until we talked earlier, and you reminded me. But I started out to do a book on women's surgeries. I was going to talk about hysterectomies, cesareans, and I hadn't gotten to the third one yet. So I interviewed women with hysterectomies. Interviewed women with cesareans, and I thought to myself, I don't want to do this book. There's something I'm missing the larger picture. And I think that so when as I interviewed the 50, 60 women, I started extrapolating what they had in common, the behavioral characteristics they had in common. Their disease was all, not, I'm not going to say irrelevant because they were some serious diseases, but they weren't my focus. The decision making was my focus. And that's when I realized that. I think I realized it twice. Once as I was doing all this extrapolation, and I thought, boy, these women, I interviewed women with different diseases on purpose. I mean, some had lupus, some had fibromyalgia, some had breast cancer. I mean, it didn't matter. And yet their decision making process was so similar. So I think that was the first time. And then the second thing when I thought, I've got a book. In fact, I have two books. That's when I really began to think about the second book. As I put together focus groups because I wanted some geographical diversity. Being in California, I wasn't going to fly. This was not before Zoom,
yeah.
but I wasn't familiar with Zoom, and so I wasn't going to fly all over the country. I didn't have that kind of money. So we put on Zoom or whatever website we used, we put together, I hired a facilitator and we put together a focus group of women, again, from different, with different diseases and from different parts of the United States, not national, I mean, not internationally. But I was amazed at how many of the women, in fact, most of them had never talked with anybody other than their doctor about their illness. And when they got together, and realized how much they had in common, how much their fears, their worries, their anxieties were similar, again, regardless of their particular disease. I almost didn't need the facilitator. I mean, they just went at it. And I thought, wow, what stops us from talking about it? And again, it's the guilt and the shame. What are people going to think? One of the things I really learned, and I think it was one of the most important things I learned, is that a lot of women blame their illness on their stress. That's why they feel so ashamed and guilty. They see their stress as causing their illness because they see themselves as overstressed. So when they get sick, it's like saying, advertising to the world, look at me, I can't manage my stress, I can't manage my life, my life is making me sick, instead of feeling everybody's stressed. Sometimes some days are worse than others. I mean, whatever it is, we all feel. Women, the women I talked with don't realize how random illness is. I mean, some people get COVID, some don't, and some are stressed and some aren't. And even the ones that are, I'm stressed. My husband just died. I've never gotten COVID. I mean, I've been really lucky. So it isn't necessarily a question of what you're doing or not doing. You can just be in the wrong place at the wrong time and have the bad luck to get it. And nobody that I talked with, very few of them, really realized that. They were sure that it was their failure as women, as wives, and as mothers that were making them sick. And I think that is a really strong answer as to why some of us feel that way.
And I love that. And everything you're saying there, I just think, okay, that could also apply to this, that could also apply to that. And like, even just like a lot of women in their 50s find themselves getting divorced, they find themselves in financial strain, maybe not financial difficulties, but financial strain. And I could see them, blaming themselves for everything that has happened over the past, 30 years. Oh, I should have made a better decision. I mean, I've even been guilty of that a little bit. Like, had I not got married to that person 20 years ago, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so what were there answers then? Like you've got this focus group, and so what did you sort of realize when they're all starting, like you said, you didn't need a facilitator anymore. You actually probably could have just let the
Yeah.
conversation ride, and these women are sharing stuff. And there is this thing where you get women together in a community, in a safe environment of like-minded women, and they will share their stories. But I think honestly, quite often, I think possibly maybe they don't think that anybody cares. Well, what my problem is, whatever, it's minuscule compared to whatever else is out there. What did you hear anything in those interviews that, you know, sort of gave you some answers? And in your book, each chapter has a little summary of, like, you know, here's what you could do next,
Right.
you know, your annual checkups, you know, all those things. But what was sort of the common themes that you heard, if they could have do it differently,
I
maybe?
heard several things that which you actually mentioned. Several of the women said, "Well, nobody cares. You know, when people say how are you, it's a retort. They don't really want to know.
Hmm.
You know, my problems are boring." Other people said, particularly those that had autoimmune diseases, people said people just think they're whining. They got a lot when they did tell
Hmm.
people, which was very rare. People would say, "Well, you don't look sick," which of course is completely dismissing what they just told you. Um, but they felt
Yeah.
basically that they were boring, number one. And number two, they didn't want people to know, because to these particular women anyway, it meant that they couldn't manage their lives, that they couldn't handle things. Um, and that was so untrue, because I could see that so many of them, in spite of their illnesses, were doing the best they could under the circumstances. And you know that I want to go back to divorce a minute, because my children have gotten divorced. Um, and they too felt guilty, and I want to just say that my attitude towards divorce is quite different. My attitude is if you're in a bad situation, get the hell out of it. Why would you stay in a
Yeah.
relationship that's uncomfortable? And even if you're one of the women, for example, whose husband is just suddenly and surprisingly left, that's still not, I still feel that you're better off. I don't want to be with, for me, I wouldn't want to be with somebody who didn't want to be with me. And that's what I told my kids. um, in their situations, I was just glad they were out of the marriage. It wasn't working, and both husbands,
Hmm.
ex-husbands, were fine, and nothing to do with the husbands. Just wasn't working, so
Yeah.
move on. Which is what I felt about my retirement. It wasn't working, so I got out of it.
Exactly.
um,
Yeah, no, that's really good. Actually, that's really good because I think we stay, you know, we stay for kids, we stay for, you know, there's probably financial reasons. We stay, you know, we stay for all those crazy reasons. So, okay, so back to the book. You are, in the book, you talk a little bit about how women and men talk a little bit differently to their doctors.
mhm.
So, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Like,
Yeah,
how am I talking to my doctor differently than a guy,
that was so
a
interesting
man?
to me when I found that research. I was like blown away. First of all, just generally speaking, men are more succinct, more objective. They view their illness differently than we do. They view it, and I don't like generalizations, but I don't know how else to phrase it. They view their illness. They're going to get together with the doctor, and together they're going to solve this problem. Women don't do that. Women go in, and I'm as guilty of this. I tell the doctor the whole story. I don't just tell them that I broke my leg. I tell them how I broke my leg and how the pain hurts and now I can't do this. And I really need to get back on that treadmill, and it's just making me so depressed. And I go on and on. And what I think what can happen, and I think it's really important to tell the doctor everything. Now that I've said that, at the same time, it can distort the diagnosis, because I'm so busy telling him about how angry and depressed I feel, that now he's lost sight that this woman's sitting here with a broken leg, or she, I shouldn't say he or she or whatever. Um,
Hmm.
you know, you lose sight of the organic nature of the problem, and it changes the focus of the visit to the psychological issues. And I think there was a study done where letters were written by male and female cancer patients, and the researchers or the students, whoever they gave the letters to, they could tell over, I think, like 60 or 70% of the time which ones were written by women and which were written by men, because the conversation styles were so different. The women's were much more interpersonal, much more emotive than the man's, longer, more words. It was really interesting, and I think it's so true. And I am actually, it's got my picture by it. The definition of women's conversational styles is me, 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 for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so do you think I should go to a male doctor or a female doctor?
That question is asked me a lot, and gosh, it's a more complex answer than you'd realize. First of all, when I started this, the jury was still out. Now it seems the newer research seems to say that women are better off, and even men maybe, but certainly women with a woman doctor. But there's a caveat that I really want to add. There's also research that a woman doctor takes much more time with you than a male doctor does. So it kind of depends what your needs are. If you want a personal relationship and you want to tell your doctor a lot of stuff and spend as much time as you can, then maybe you are better off with a woman doctor. If you're on your lunch hour and you want to dash in and dash out, then you're better off with a male doctor. And now that I've said that, again, let's talk about stereotypes, because I have
Right.
a cardiologist who's a male and spends about an hour, maybe an hour and a half with me. I mean, you guys, I'm not making a mistake. An hour, let's forget the hour and
Right.
a half. I mean, that's unheard of. He wants to know how I am, and we talk. I mean, I can tell you all kinds of things about him. He can tell you all kinds of things about me. He's fabulous. I have an endocrinologist. I walk in and she says, it's a woman, and she says, "Hi, how are you?" And I go, "Fine." And then we move on. I mean, I just lost my husband. I'm not fine, but I'm not, I can
Yeah.
see that that's who she is. So I just, what, she's not going to bring him back. So it's not going to help me anyway. But so again, it just depends on the individual. Um,
And I think too, it sort of prompts me to think, how we talk a lot about like taking care, like taking your health care into your own hands as well. So as you mentioned in the book, getting second opinions, understanding, diagnosis, and obviously I'm not saying go and Google search everything because I mean, God, that could, Dr. Google is a little bit
right.
crazy anyway. I mean, you could be dead tomorrow by all accounts of a Google search. But I agree with that. I do know a good friend of mine has a clinic in Calgary that is she specifically designed for vaginal health, and she said like you're going to a doctor that is based very on scientific research. We know that most scientific research, especially around menopause and human or the women's anatomy, that it's a little bit dated, but we go into the doctor with those preconceived notions as well, like even like talking about HRT, hormone
Mhm.
replacement. you know it's like, yeah, I mean, I know I talk to some of my friends and I ask them if they're on it and they're like, oh God, no, that's caused breast cancer.
Right.
Oh, but have you ever talked to your doctor about it? Have you ever done some research? Have you talked to other women who are on it? Oh yeah, no, no, no. Causes breast cancer. No, that's not. It's not for me. So instead, they'll suffer with hot flashes and brain fog and low libido and depression and all of that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting. Very interesting. Um. So sorry. Go ahead.
I think that I want to think a minute. Being in charge of your own health is the most important thing you can do for yourself. And let me for a moment just tell you what I mean about being in charge. I mean, that's an easy thing to say, but there are some specific strategies. And the first one, and I have to go through this because I think it's so important. But the first one
Yeah.
is really
Sure.
to make a list and prioritize your symptoms when you go into the doctor. It's so important to have it written down because, again, if you're like me, I get anxious. I forget half of what I wanted to say. Now that I've done my research, now I actually write out a list. I mean, I learned from my own book, but it focuses the visit. Plus, you get to say everything that you wanted to say when you sat at home thinking about it. And the other thing that's, I think, really important is to do your research. And I mean, Dr. Google is okay, but either use the resource list at the back of my book or find somebody's, because I gave, and I'm sure other people have as well, a list of what I consider, at least they were reliable websites at the time that I used them. I did an awful lot of research in this book, and some of the websites I found were not of value to me at all, and others were fabulous. So it tells you how to do your research. It tells you how to find out if your hospital is good. I mean, some hospitals specialize in cardiology, others in neurology. I mean, it depends what procedure or surgery you're having. It tells you how to research your doctor, how to research your disease, etc. I think that's really important. And really, what's important is second opinions. I mean, if you break your leg and you go in and your doctor says, you've got a broken leg, that's why your leg hurts. Well, you don't need to get a second opinion. But if they told me that
Right.
that I had cancer and I needed chemotherapy or whatever, I certainly would. I think it's really important to remember. Well, first of all, every profession. I don't care if we're talking about podcasters or hairdressers or doctors or plumbers. Some are good and some are idiots, and that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And you don't know which
Yeah.
one you have unless you got to do your research. That's number one. And
Absolutely.
secondly, there's about, gosh, I think it was like 30 or 40,000 different diseases out there. And those are just the ones we know about. And we all see what
No,
we expect to
exactly.
see. So if you go in complaining of fatigue and I've lost my appetite and I'm a little depressed, those symptoms can fit at least 39,000 out of the 40,000 diseases. So your psychologist
Right.
is going to tell you it's stress. Your rheumatologist is going to tell you where you have it's the pain, the joint pain. I mean, everybody sees through their own eyes. So what you want when you get a second opinion is a different perspective. I would never go to somebody in the same office. On the contrary, if my doctor did his training at UCLA, I try to find somebody that did their training from SC or NYU or one of those. You want a different perspective. You don't want somebody with the same point of view. So that's the end of my proselytizing, but that's what I mean by taking charge.
No, and I love it, and I love the resources in the back because you're right. It's even hard to find those resources through a Google search. Like, where can I find the best? Like, Mayo Clinic comes up. Well, okay. Well, we all know that
Right,
there's more to
right,
the Mayo Clinic. There's
right.
more than just the Mayo Clinic. So I love that. So the book really, in a nutshell, is like it goes through the mindset and the psychological aspects of why we, as women, may not, you know, take care of ourselves
Right.
the way that we should, or we sometimes mismanage our healthcare. Manage and some I think it I think that was the original name
Was
of the
the
book was
original way.
some women, yeah.
how women how women
How,
manage and mismanage their health. And just so everybody knows, I did change the title because it's a book that's pro women. And on TikTok, I had I have a TikTok site, and I got over 100,000 views on one. I mean, it went viral. That's the only one that did. But nevertheless, everybody
yeah.
complained they wouldn't buy the book because they thought the book was blaming women, which is exactly the opposite. So I gave up and just changed the title. But so now it's called Sidelined: How Women Can Navigate a Broken Healthcare System, which is not very catchy, but there it is. Um,
uh, but it's a full value proposition for sure. Like it definitely that, and that's what it is. It's if you don't want to talk to your doctor, or you don't want to you don't want to talk to other people, here's why you're thinking this way, and it really sort of helps you psychologically kind of get through, what, God, maybe that's what I'm doing, and sort of challenge your way of thinking. And then again, at the back is this very helpful resources. So before we bring it to the close, Susan, let's talk a little bit about the journey of writing this book, because again, sometimes we think, oh, well, I have to have the table of contents, I'll figure it out, and I get all of that. I mean, I know you had, I guess, in every journey of entrepreneurship, whether it's writing a book, starting a business, we have these mindset little games that go along. So we all know that it's not a straight line from A to B. It's this line that goes curvy, curvy, curly, curly, and everything. So take us a little bit through the journey of you. Like, how many times did you say, "Oh, screw this! I'm not going to do this
Oh,
book.
so
I give up. I
many times.
just."
Let me just back up for a moment because, of course, I did that a lot. But even when we were in, I think any entrepreneurship, any business you start, whether it's writing or training films or whatever, is a journey. So we started making, when my husband and I started making films, videos for early childhood education. I mean, we did films on, I don't even know, just for kids. I mean, for first grade, second grade. And that was in the 70s. So it was right when Nixon cut funds for federal education. So we thought, timing is everything and we better do something else. So our original business was going to be children's films. The journey was making training films. I mean, we changed midstream. With the book, my journey was I was going to do women's surgeries, and instead I did women's behavior. So don't that's the point of my point is that it's a process. You don't know the table of contents, and even if you think you do, you very well may change midstream. What I did with the first book is I interviewed the women and found a book in it. Now I've the second book. I have something I want to say, and I'm going to see if there's women that can tell me their story that will match my thesis. And then maybe I won't, and maybe I'll be doing a lot of work and a lot of research, and it won't come out that way at all. So the editing, I mean the writing process, well, that was a Freudian slip because it is a matter of editing. I cannot tell you how many times I said, screw this. I'm not a writer. I am going to go ahead, take somebody to lunch and forget this. I mean, that was, if not daily, it was certainly weekly. And I want to just talk for a minute to those writers that are out there. The editing process, you have to, when you think that your manuscript is together enough, you need a professional editor, and don't let anybody talk you out of it. And it can be expensive. It depends who the editor is. I mean, I don't know that there's an average fee, but it's just heart rendering. You turn in something that you think is the next War and Peace, and it comes back all cut and pasted and redlined. And oh, it was, I mean, I hope my editor doesn't hear this podcast because I would cry. I would sit there and cry. I mean, I was way past the screw this stage. I was devastated. It was attacking my core. and, and I'm serious. I'm truly not being dramatic. And then my husband would give me a glass of wine or a vodka, and I'd sort of calm down and go to bed. And next day, I'd kind of take another look at what she did and review it and think, well, maybe not. Maybe that is better. Anyway, I always ended up accepting, if not 90%, at least 99% of her changes because they were always better.
Yeah.
So it's a process, is what I'm saying. The first thing it does is completely destroy your identity. And then the second thing it does is put you back together again in a new and better way. How's that?
I love that. That's great. We're going to quote that. And, and it's so true. Even just even like starting a business. I mean, my offer has evolved so much, but had I not put it out there, it's what we talked about. Just get on the path and just stuff will start to show up. Had you not decided to go to university, you probably wouldn't have written a book. I don't know, or maybe you would have.
No,
Who
I don't
knows?
think so.
But
I
at
don't
the
think so. You have to get, it was the food coming in. I mean, you have to get nutrition coming in, and then it turns you in a direction. You never know what you don't know. I mean, it's that simple.
Absolutely. And and learn how to take feedback, and your editor was your sort of community, I guess, and you probably had a few people reading
I
the
did.
your transcript along the
I
way.
did.
So you drew on the community, you found your support network, you had your editor. It's no different than starting a business. Get into a community of women who are trying to do the same thing, because as you said when you were interviewing the focus group of women, boy, when they saw that they were with somebody that was like-minded and they were going through the same challenges, all of a sudden they were solving each other's problems. They were sharing stories,
Right.
and it makes you just feel better. So yeah, I mean, I love that part of your journey. And congratulations for everybody. Again, the book is called Sidelined: How Women Can Navigate a Broken Healthcare System. You can get it through Amazon, I suspect. And yeah,
Barnes and
okay, perfect.
Noble, and
And
anywhere books are
Barnes,
sold.
yeah, perfect. And looking forward to the next book because the subject on this one is shame, correct?
Well,
Well, we think it is
no,
going to be.
exactly right. Exactly right. It's turning into much more about gaslighting than see, there it is, than I anticipated. I started to write.
I love
My
it.
title is great. It's about the health risks of being female, or being a female is injurious to your health, something to that effect. And it is. I mean, I had no idea. I just had no idea that. I mean, I just got to say for a minute, when women go to the hospital complaining of pain, I think they are. I can't remember exactly, but roughly 15% of women are given pain medication. The rest are told that it's emotional. Then they're given antidepressants, and that it drives me crazy. And the same with a heart
Yeah,
attack. Women wait 11 to 15 minutes longer to be treated for a heart attack, where time is of the essence, than men do. And they can have exactly the same symptoms. We're just not considered
yeah,
reliable reporters of our own stuff. It's just,
that's right.
it's
It's
terrible.
crazy.
It's terrible. So the book is changing as I get into it, and that's one of my major points, actually. Um,
I love it. I love it. Susan, you've been a real pleasure. Thank you. I definitely want to bring you back for book number 2. So hurry up and get that thing written and published. I think you're going to find it.
I promise, not 10 years. I can't. That time I don't have.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you again. You're a real joy. I hope that when in a few more years, when I'm in my 80s, that I am just as spry and wonderful as you. So you're a
Thank
real
you so much,
inspiration.
love. I appreciate it.
Thank you.